The moment, Olivia Reynolds felt the weight of someone's gaze boring into her back like a physical touch. She knew the market trip had gone from ordinary to dangerous in the span of a single heartbeat. She'd woken that morning in her small room above the general store in Prescott, Arizona territory, with nothing more pressing on her mind than purchasing fresh vegetables and perhaps a new spool of thread. The year was 1878, and though the town had grown considerably since silver had been discovered in the nearby mountains, it still retained that rough edge that made a woman think twice about venturing anywhere alone. At 22 years old, Olivia had learned to trust her instincts, and right now every nerve in her body screamed that something was wrong. The late September sun beat down on the crowded market square, where vendors hawked everything from fresh produce to mining equipment. Women in calico dresses moved between the stalls while men in dusty boots and worn hats discussed claims and ore samples. The air smelled of livestock, leather, and the bread baking at Mrs. Henderson's stall. Olivia adjusted her basket on her arm and pretended to examine a display of apples, using the opportunity to glance behind her. There, a man in a dark coat, hat pulled low over his eyes, standing perhaps 20 feet away. He wasn't looking at the goods, he was looking at her. When their eyes met for the briefest moment, something cold slithered down her spine. His face was angular and hard, with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw. But it wasn't his appearance that frightened her. It was the intentionality in his gaze, the way he didn't look away or pretend he'd been doing anything else. Olivia's fingers trembled as she placed 2 apples in her basket and paid the vendor. She'd been working as a seamstress in Prescott for 3 years now, ever since her father had died and left her with nothing but debts. She'd paid them off through hard work and careful living, keeping to herself and avoiding trouble. She had no enemies that she knew of, no reason for anyone to follow her through the market like a predator tracking prey. She moved to the next stall, selecting carrots with hands that shook slightly despite her efforts to remain calm. When she looked up again, the man had moved closer. He was now only 15 feet away, and he'd positioned himself between her and the main street that led back to her lodgings. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs. Olivia changed direction, heading deeper into the market instead of toward the exit. Perhaps she could lose him in the crowd, or find someone she knew well enough to walk with. The Reynolds family hadn't been wealthy, but her father had been respected, and there were people in town who remembered her. Surely she could find help if she needed it. But as she wove between stalls, pretending to browse while her mind raced, she realized the stranger was matching her movements. Every turn she made, every pause at a vendor's table, he mirrored from a distance that seemed calculated to keep her in sight without drawing attention. He wasn't trying to hide his pursuit anymore. He wanted her to know he was there. Panic fluttered in her chest like a caged bird. What did he want? She thought of the small amount of money in her reticule, hardly worth the effort of stalking someone through a busy market. She thought of the stories she'd heard whispered among the women at the sewing circle, tales of girls who disappeared from mining towns, only to turn up weeks later in brothels in San Francisco or Denver if they turned up at all. The thought made her stomach turn. She needed to get home. Now. Even if the stranger followed her, at least Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house, would be there, and Mr. Garrett, who worked at the general store below. She wouldn't be alone. Olivia turned sharply toward Montezuma Street, the main thoroughfare that would take her home. She walked quickly, not quite running but moving with purpose. Her boots clicked against the wooden boardwalk and she could hear the sounds of the market fading behind her. And beneath those sounds, she heard other footsteps, heavier, keeping pace. She didn't look back. Looking back would confirm what she already knew, and somehow that made it more real, more terrifying. Instead, she kept her eyes forward and her chin up, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. The street was busy enough, with wagons rolling past and men going about their business. Surely he wouldn't try anything here, in broad daylight, with witnesses everywhere. But then she remembered that this was the Arizona Territory, where violence erupted as suddenly as summer thunderstorms, and justice was often dispensed from the barrel of a gun rather than the bench of a courtroom. A woman alone was vulnerable, regardless of how many people might be nearby. The footsteps behind her grew closer. Olivia's breath came faster. She could see the general store now, just another block away. If she could just reach it, she'd be safe. She'd lock herself in her room and not come out until morning. And perhaps by then, the stranger would have moved on to easier prey. She was so focused on her destination that she didn't see the massive figure step out from the alley ahead until she nearly collided with him. Olivia gasped and stumbled backward, her basket nearly slipping from her arm. The sun was behind the man, casting him in shadow, but even so she could see he was enormous. Easily over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the world behind him. For one horrible moment she thought she'd been flanked, that this giant was working with the scarred stranger, and she was trapped between them. Then the big man stepped forward into the light, and Olivia saw his face. He was younger than she'd expected from his size, perhaps 27 or 28, with a strong jaw covered in dark stubble and hair that fell past his collar in waves that suggested he was long overdue for a visit to the barber. His eyes were a striking gray-blue, like storm clouds over the mountains, and they were fixed not on her but on something behind her. His expression was hard, dangerous, protective. He wore buckskin trousers and a heavy flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms roped with muscle. A knife hung at his belt, and everything about him spoke of a man who lived on the edge of civilization, who was more comfortable in the wilderness than in town. Without a word, the mountain man stepped past Olivia, positioning himself between her and the street behind. She turned, following his gaze, and saw the scarred stranger had stopped perhaps 10 feet away. The two men stared at each other for a long moment, and though no words were exchanged, something passed between them. Some masculine communication that transcended language, a challenge and a warning all at once. The scarred man's hand drifted toward his coat, where Olivia could now see the outline of a pistol. The mountain man didn't move, didn't reach for his own weapon, but something in his posture shifted. He seemed to grow even larger, more imposing, and there was a quality to his stillness that reminded Olivia of a mountain lion she'd once seen, frozen in the moment before the strike. Whatever the scarred stranger saw in the mountain man's face, it was enough. He let his hand fall away from his coat, took one step backward, then another. His eyes flicked to Olivia, and she saw something in them that made her blood run cold, a promise that this wasn't over. Then he turned and melted into the crowd moving along the boardwalk, disappearing as quickly as fog burning off in the morning sun. Olivia realized she'd been holding her breath. She let it out in a shaky exhale, her knees suddenly weak. The mountain man turned to face her, and she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Up close, she could see a small scar through his left eyebrow and tiny lines at the corners of his eyes from squinting into the sun. His face was tanned and weathered, handsome in a rough, unpolished way that made her think of granite cliffs and pine forests. "You all right, miss?" His voice was deep and gravelly, with the slow cadence of someone who spent more time with his own thoughts than in conversation. Yes, thank you." Olivia's voice sounded thin and breathless to her own ears. She clutched her basket tighter, as if it could anchor her to the present moment and keep her from flying apart. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't. Best not to think on it." The mountain man glanced down the street in the direction the stranger had gone, his eyes narrowing. "You know him?" "No, I've never seen him before today. He started following me in the market." The reality of the situation was beginning to sink in now, and with it came a trembling that started in her hands and spread through her body. "I don't understand why he would. Where do you live?" The question was abrupt, almost gruff, but Olivia heard the concern underneath it. She gestured toward the general store. "Just there, above the store." The mountain man nodded once. "I'll walk you back." It wasn't a question or an offer. It was a statement of fact as immovable as the mountains themselves. Olivia should have protested. She should have thanked him for his help and assured him she could manage the last block on her own. But the truth was she didn't want to be alone, not even for the minute it would take to reach her door. So instead, she simply nodded and began walking, acutely aware of the solid, protective presence beside her. They moved in silence, the mountain man adjusting his long stride to match her shorter one. Olivia was intensely conscious of the looks they were drawing from passers-by. A woman walking with a man who looked like he'd just stepped out of the wilderness was noteworthy in any town, but particularly in Prescott, where most people knew each other's business. By nightfall, half the town would be speculating about who he was and what he was doing with Olivia Reynolds. "I'm Olivia," she said, because the silence was stretching too long and she felt she owed him at least that much. "Olivia Reynolds." He glanced down at her, and for just a moment something softened in those storm cloud eyes. "Peter Walsh. You're not from Prescott." Another statement of fact, not a question. No one in town looked like Peter Walsh. "No, madam, up from the mountains. Got business with the assayer." That explained the buckskin and the wild look. He was a trapper or a prospector, one of the solitary men who spent months in the high country with only their own company. They came to town periodically to sell furs or file claims, to stock up on supplies and remind themselves what civilization looked like, then disappeared back into the wilderness as quickly as they'd come. Olivia had seen dozens of them over the years, though few as imposing as Peter Walsh. They reached the general store, and Olivia paused at the door that led to the boarding rooms upstairs. Now that they were here, she wasn't sure what to say. "Thank you" seemed inadequate for what he'd done, but what else was there, Mr. Walsh? "I don't know how to repay you for your kindness. If you hadn't come along when you did." She trailed off, not wanting to give voice to the dark possibilities. "No repayment needed." Peter glanced up and down the street, his expression thoughtful. "You got people here? Family?" "No, my father passed 3 years ago. I work as a seamstress, and I rent a room from Mrs. Patterson." She wasn't sure why she was telling him this, only that his question had been more than mere politeness. He was assessing her situation, trying to determine how vulnerable she was. Peter's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That man who was following you, he meant you harm. I've seen his kind before. They don't give up easy." The trembling that had subsided started up again. Olivia had been trying not to think about that, trying to convince herself that the stranger's interest had been momentary, that he'd found someone else to bother now that she was safely home. But Peter's words gave voice to the fear that had been coiling in her stomach since the moment she'd felt that first prickling awareness in the market. "What should I do?" The question came out smaller than she'd intended, almost childlike. Peter was quiet for a long moment, his gaze still scanning the street. When he finally spoke, his words were measured and careful. "Don't go anywhere alone, not until he's moved on or been dealt with. You got friends you can walk with?" "Yes. Sarah Miller, she works at the hotel, and Mrs. Henderson from the market." "Good. Stay with them when you're out. Keep your door locked at night." He paused, then added, "I'll be in town a few more days, finishing my business. I'll keep an eye out." Something warm unfurled in Olivia's chest, a feeling she couldn't quite name. Gratitude, certainly, but something more than that. This stranger, this mountain man who had no obligation to her whatsoever, was offering to watch over her. In a world where she'd been alone for so long, where she'd learned to rely only on herself, the gesture felt monumental. "Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Truly." He nodded once, then tipped his head in a gesture that was almost courtly despite his rough appearance. "Miss Reynolds." Olivia watched him walk away, his broad shoulders and confident stride drawing the eye of everyone he passed. Then she slipped inside, climbed the stairs to her room, and locked the door behind her with hands that still shook. The rest of the day passed in a haze of anxiety and distraction. Olivia tried to focus on her sewing, working on a dress commission for Mrs. Thornton, the banker's wife, but she kept pricking her fingers and having to redo seams. Every sound from the street below made her jump. Every footstep on the stairs outside her door set her heart racing. She kept thinking about the scarred stranger's eyes, the cold promise she'd seen in them. And she kept thinking about Peter Walsh, the solid warmth of his presence, the way he'd stepped between her and danger without a moment's hesitation. That night, Olivia barely slept. She lay in her narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the town settling down for the night. The saloons would stay open until the early hours, and occasionally she heard the shouts of drunk miners or the crack of a pistol shot. Prescott was a relatively civilized town by frontier standards, but it was still the West, still a place where violence simmered just below the surface of daily life. In the morning, exhausted and jittery from lack of sleep, Olivia decided she couldn't hide in her room forever. She had work to do, fabric to purchase, customers to visit. She would just have to be careful, just as Peter had advised. She would stay in public places, walk with friends when possible, and keep her wits about her. She dressed in her second-best dress, a practical brown calico with a fitted bodice and full skirts, and pinned her dark hair up in a simple style. When she looked in the small mirror above her washstand, she saw shadows under her green eyes and a tightness around her mouth that hadn't been there 2 days ago. The stranger had stolen more than just her sense of safety. He'd stolen her peace of mind. Olivia had just finished pinning her hat when someone knocked on her door. She froze, her heart leaping into her throat. The knock came again, firm but not aggressive. "Miss Reynolds, it's Peter Walsh." Relief flooded through her so suddenly she felt dizzy. Olivia crossed to the door and opened it, finding the mountain man standing in the narrow hallway. He looked even larger in the confined space, and she noticed he'd made some effort to clean up. His hair was damp and combed back from his face, and he'd shaved the heavy stubble from his jaw, revealing a strong chin with a small cleft. He wore the same buckskin trousers but had changed to a clean shirt, and she could smell soap and leather and something else, something wild like pine and mountain air. "Mr. Walsh, I wasn't expecting. I finished up at the assayer's office earlier than I thought." His eyes searched her face, noting the shadows and the fatigue. "Figured I'd see if you needed to go anywhere today. If you do, I'd be happy to accompany you." It was the last thing Olivia had expected. She knew mountain men, knew they valued their solitude and their independence above almost everything else. For Peter to offer his time, to essentially act as her bodyguard, was extraordinary. "I do need to visit Mrs. Thornton about her dress fitting, and I wanted to stop by the fabric shop. But I couldn't ask you to spend your day escorting me around town. You must have your own business to attend to." "Nothing that can't wait." Peter's expression was unreadable, but something in his voice suggested this wasn't entirely about duty or obligation. Besides, I'd rest easier knowing you were safe. The warmth in Olivia's chest from yesterday returned, stronger now. She found herself studying his face, really looking at him for the first time. There was a quietness to Peter Walsh, a self-contained quality that spoke of long hours alone with his thoughts. But there was also a kindness in his eyes, a gentleness that seemed at odds with his powerful build and rough exterior. "Then I accept, gratefully. Just let me get my things." They set out into the bright October morning, Prescott coming alive with the daily bustle of commerce and conversation. Olivia felt the curious stares of her neighbors as she walked beside Peter, and she saw Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rise nearly to her hairline when they passed the landlady on the stairs. But for the first time since yesterday's incident, Olivia didn't feel the constant prickling awareness of danger. With Peter beside her, she felt protected, safe. They made their way to the Thornton house on the hill, one of the nicer residences in Prescott. Mrs. Thornton, a plump woman in her 40s with more money than taste, answered the door herself and practically dragged Olivia inside, all the while eyeing Peter with unconcealed curiosity. "My heavens, Olivia dear, who is your companion?" "This is Mr. Peter Walsh. He's kindly escorting me on my errands today." "How thoughtful." Mrs. Thornton's eyes sparkled with speculation and gossip potential. "Will he be waiting inside or—" "I'll wait out here, madam," Peter said, his deep voice polite but firm. He'd already positioned himself on the porch where he could see the street in both directions. Inside, while Olivia pinned and adjusted the dress on Mrs. Thornton, the older woman peppered her with questions. Who was this Mr. Walsh? Where had they met? Was there an understanding between them? Olivia deflected as best she could, explaining only that Mr. Walsh had helped her with a difficulty and was being kind enough to ensure her safety while he was in town. But she could see Mrs. Thornton wasn't satisfied with such a simple explanation, and Olivia knew the gossip mill would be working overtime by afternoon. When they emerged from the house an hour later, Peter was exactly where she'd left him, patient and watchful. They continued to the fabric shop, where Olivia needed to select material for a new commission. Peter followed her inside this time, looking distinctly uncomfortable among the bolts of cloth and jars of buttons. He stood near the door, his size and presence drawing the attention of every woman in the shop. Olivia was examining a lovely blue cotton when Mrs. Yates, the shop owner, sidled up beside her with a knowing smile. "That's quite the gentleman you have with you, Miss Reynolds." "He's not." "We're not." Olivia felt her cheeks heat. "He's simply being kind, hum." Mrs. Yates didn't sound convinced. "Well, he certainly seems taken with you. He hasn't taken his eyes off you since you walked in." Olivia couldn't help herself. She glanced toward the door and found Peter's gaze on her, just as Mrs. Yates had said. When their eyes met, something passed between them, a connection that made Olivia's breath catch. He looked away first, but not before she saw something in his expression that made her heart beat faster. By the time they'd finished the errands and were walking back toward the boarding house, the sun was high overhead and Prescott was at its busiest. Olivia found herself relaxing in Peter's presence, drawn into conversation by his quiet questions about her work, her life in town. He was a good listener, she discovered, the kind of person who truly heard what was said rather than simply waiting for his turn to speak. "What about you?" Olivia asked as they paused to let a wagon pass. "What's life like in the mountains?" Peter was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the distant peaks visible beyond the town's edge. "Peaceful, hard sometimes, especially in winter, but honest. Out there you know what you're up against. Cold, hunger, the animals. It's straightforward. You prefer it to town." "Generally." He looked down at her, and there was something in his expression she couldn't quite read. Though I'm finding some things about town aren't so bad." Before Olivia could respond to that, before she could examine the flutter in her stomach that his words caused, a voice called out behind them, "Miss Reynolds." They turned to find Sheriff Daniels approaching, his badge glinting in the sunlight. He was a tall, lean man in his 50s with iron-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Those eyes were currently assessing Peter with the professional wariness of a lawman encountering a stranger. "Sheriff." Olivia's greeting was cautious. Sheriff Daniels was fair but strict, and she wasn't sure how he'd view the situation with Peter. "I heard from Mrs. Patterson that you had some trouble yesterday in the market." The sheriff's gaze remained on Peter, "and that this gentleman came to your assistance." "That's right. Mr. Walsh here intervened when a stranger was following me. I'm very grateful for his help." "Peter Walsh." Peter extended his hand, and after a moment the sheriff shook it. "You knew in town Mr. Walsh, just passing through, had some business with the assayer." Sheriff Daniels nodded slowly. "This stranger who was bothering Miss Reynolds, can you describe him?" Peter did, providing details that Olivia herself had been too frightened to fully register. The scar, the height and build, the dark coat, even the particular way the man wore his gun. The sheriff's expression grew more troubled with each detail. "I know who you're talking about. Name's Silas Crane, at least that's what he's going by these days. He's a bounty hunter, got a reputation for bending the law when it suits him. Been in town about a week." Sheriff Daniels looked at Olivia with concern. "You have any idea why he'd be interested in you?" "None at all, Sheriff. I don't know the man, never seen him before yesterday." "Could be a case of mistaken identity," the sheriff mused. "Or could be he's looking for someone and thinks you know where they are. Either way, I don't like it. I'll have a word with Mr. Crane, make it clear he's to leave you alone." "I'd appreciate that, Sheriff." After Sheriff Daniels departed, Olivia and Peter continued toward the boarding house in silence. The mention of Silas Crane had brought back all the fear from yesterday, the cold certainty that she'd been marked as prey. She must have shown her distress on her face, because when they reached her door, Peter's hand came to rest gently on her arm. "You're safe, Olivia. I won't let anything happen to you." The use of her first name, the quiet certainty in his voice, the warmth of his hand even through the fabric of her sleeve, all of it combined to create a feeling that was both comforting and unsettling. Olivia looked up at him, at this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known to speak, and felt something shift inside her. "Why are you doing this?" The question emerged before she could think better of it. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Why would you spend your time watching over me?" Peter was quiet for a long moment, his gray-blue eyes searching her face. When he spoke, his voice was low and earnest. "Because the moment I saw you in that street, saw the fear in your eyes and that man stalking you like you were nothing more than prey, something in me said protect her. I can't explain it better than that. I just know that walking away, leaving you to face whatever that man wants on your own, it isn't something I can do." Olivia's breath caught. In her 22 years, no one had ever spoken to her with such raw honesty, such complete lack of pretense. And no one had ever made her feel the way Peter Walsh did, safe and seen and somehow precious, all at once. "I don't know what to say." A small smile tugged at the corner of Peter's mouth, the first she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges and revealing a warmth that made her heart skip. "You don't have to say anything. Just let me help. That's enough." Over the next 3 days, Peter became a constant presence in Olivia's life. He walked her to her appointments, waited patiently while she worked, shared meals with her at the boarding house much to Mrs. Patterson's delight and speculation. They talked for hours, and Olivia found herself telling him things she'd never shared with anyone. About her father's death, about the loneliness of the past 3 years, about her dreams of someday having her own dress shop. And Peter, in his quiet way, shared pieces of his own story. His childhood in Missouri, the death of his parents in a cholera outbreak when he was 17, the years he'd spent drifting west until he found his home in the mountains. "Don't you get lonely?" Olivia asked one evening as they sat on the porch of the boarding house, watching the sun set behind the mountains. "All that time alone, sometimes," Peter admitted. "But I've always figured loneliness was better than being with the wrong people. Quality over quantity, I suppose." "And you've never thought about settling down? Having a family?" Something flickered across Peter's face, an expression that might have been longing or regret or both. "I've thought about it. Just never found anyone who'd want to share that kind of life. It's not easy, living on the edge of things. Not comfortable. Maybe comfort isn't as important as we think it is." Olivia surprised herself with the words, but as soon as she spoke them, she knew they were true. 3 years of safe, comfortable loneliness in Prescott had taught her that security wasn't the same as happiness. Peter turned to look at her, really look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her pulse race. Maybe not. They didn't see any sign of Sela's crane during those 3 days, though Sheriff Daniels reported that the bounty hunter was still in town and claimed he'd never meant Miss Reynolds any harm, that it had all been a misunderstanding. The sheriff didn't believe him, and neither did Peter, so they remained vigilant. But as the days passed without incident, Olivia found her fear fading, replaced by something else entirely. She was falling in love with Peter Walsh. It happened gradually, then all at once. In the way he listened when she spoke, like her words were the most important thing in the world. In the gentle care he took not to crowd her or make her uncomfortable despite his size. In the rare smiles that lit up his face and the rumbling laugh she managed to coax out of him occasionally. In the moments when their hands would brush accidentally and electricity would arc between them. In the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, with an expression that was tender and hungry and almost reverent. Olivia had never felt this way before, had never understood what the romantic novels she sometimes read were trying to convey. But now she understood. This was what it meant to feel truly connected to another person, to want their happiness as much as your own, to imagine a future that included them and feel excited rather than afraid. The problem was that Peter was leaving. His business in town was finished, his supplies were restocked, and he'd been away from his claim long enough. He told her on the 4th day as they walked together to the general store, and Olivia felt something crack inside her chest. "When?" The word came out steadier than she felt. "Day after tomorrow. Early. 2 more days. 48 hours, and then Peter Walsh would ride out of Prescott and out of her life back to his mountains and his solitary existence." The thought was unbearable. "I see." Olivia kept her eyes forward, afraid that if she looked at him she'd do something foolish like cry or beg him to stay. "Olivia." Peter's hand caught her elbow, gently turning her to face him. They'd stopped in the middle of the boardwalk and people had to step around them, but Olivia couldn't bring herself to care. "I don't want to go." "Then don't." The words burst out before she could stop them. "Stay, you could find work here, you could." "I can't." His voice was rough with regret. "I've got a claim up in the high country. It's not much, but it's mine, and I've put 2 years into it. I can't just walk away from that." "No, of course not. I'm sorry, that was foolish of me." Olivia pulled away, embarrassed by her outburst. "You have your own life, your own responsibilities. I had no right to ask you to give that up." "Olivia, please." Peter's hand found hers, his large fingers wrapping around her smaller ones. The contact sent warmth racing up her arm. "If things were different, if I had something to offer you besides a hard life in a mountain cabin miles from anywhere, I'd be asking you to come with me. But I can't do that. It wouldn't be fair." Olivia's breath caught. "You'd want me to come with you." "More than I've wanted anything in a long time." Peter's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, and his eyes were intense on hers. "These past few days with you, they've been the best days I can remember. You make me laugh, make me think. You make me want things I thought I'd given up on. But I can't ask you to leave everything you know for a life that's hard and uncertain." "What if I want to?" The question hung between them, huge and terrifying and thrilling all at once. Peter's expression was tortured. "You don't know what you'd be giving up." "No more dress commissions, no more conversations with your friends at the market. Just me and the mountains and winters that last 6 months. It's no life for someone like you." "Someone like me?" A spark of anger flared in Olivia's chest. "You mean someone too soft, too civilized, too weak?" "I didn't say weak, but you were thinking it." Olivia pulled her hand from his, hurt and frustrated in equal measure. "You think because I sew dresses and live in a boarding house that I couldn't handle a harder life. But you don't know me as well as you think you do, Peter Walsh. I've been alone and surviving in this town for 3 years. I've dealt with drunk miners trying to break down my door and suppliers who try to cheat me because I'm a woman on my own. I've gone without food so I could pay my rent, and I've worked until my fingers bled to make a life for myself. I'm not some delicate flower that will wilt at the first sign of hardship." Peter stared at her, something like wonder dawning in his eyes. "No, you're not. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met." "Then why won't you let me make my own choice?" The question hung in the air between them. Around them, Prescott continued its daily rhythm, but for Olivia, the whole world had narrowed to this moment, to the man standing before her and the precipice they were both approaching. "Because I'm falling in love with you," Peter said, his voice rough and low. "And if you came with me and ended up miserable, if you came to regret it or resent me, I don't think I could survive that." Olivia's heart felt too large for her chest. "I'm falling in love with you too, and yes, maybe I would find it hard. Maybe there would be days when I missed town or wished for an easier life. But I'd rather have a hard life with you than a comfortable one alone. Olivia, I'm not asking you for promises or guarantees. I'm just asking for a chance. Let me come with you, at least for a visit. Let me see this life you've built, and then I can make an informed decision. If I can't handle it, if it's too much, I'll come back to Prescott. But let me try." Peter searched her face, and Olivia could see the war being waged behind his eyes, fear and hope and longing all battling for dominance. Finally, slowly, he nodded. "A visit, for a week, maybe 2, and if it's too much, if you want to come back, I'll bring you myself. No judgment, no regrets." Relief and excitement flooded through Olivia in equal measure. "Thank you. We leave tomorrow then." "It's a 2-day ride to the cabin, and the trail isn't easy. You'll need proper clothes, warm ones, and we'll need to get you a horse." The practical considerations helped ground the moment, pulling them back from the emotional precipice. They spent the rest of the day preparing for the journey. Peter helped Olivia select sturdy traveling clothes from the general store, wool trousers and a heavy coat that scandalized Mrs. Patterson but were necessary for mountain travel. He arranged for a gentle mare named Daisy that would suit a rider without much experience. And all the while, Olivia felt like she was moving through a dream, unable to quite believe that she was really doing this, really preparing to ride off into the wilderness with a man she'd known less than a week. That night, as Olivia packed her few belongings into saddlebags, there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find Sarah Miller, her friend from the hotel, standing in the hallway with a concerned expression. "Olivia, is it true? Are you really leaving with that mountain man? His name is Peter, and yes, just for a visit to see his claim. Sarah stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. She was a few years older than Olivia, a practical woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. Olivia, you barely know him. What if he's not what he seems? What if you get up into those mountains and— He's exactly what he seems, Olivia interrupted gently. He's a good man, Sarah. He helped me when I needed it, and he's given me nothing but respect and kindness since. But to leave everything, to go off into the wilderness. I'm not leaving forever. I'm just going to see if this life, his life, is something I could be part of. And if it's not, I'll come back. Sarah didn't look convinced, but she could apparently see that Olivia's mind was made up. Just promise me you'll be careful. And if anything feels wrong, if you need help, you'll find a way to get word to town. I promise. After Sarah left, Olivia returned to her packing, but her hands had slowed. Was she being foolish? Was she letting a few days of intense emotion cloud her judgment? She thought about the life she'd built in Prescott, modest as it was. She had work she enjoyed, a room of her own, friends like Sarah who cared about her. Was it smart to risk all that for a man she barely knew? But then she thought about the years stretching ahead. More of the same loneliness and isolation dressed up as independence. She thought about growing old in this town, always wondering what might have been if she'd been brave enough to take a chance. And she thought about Peter, about the way he made her feel alive and seen and cherished. Whatever happened, whatever she found in those mountains, at least she wouldn't have the regret of not trying. The next morning dawned clear and cold, autumn's chill settling over Prescott like a promise of winter to come. Peter arrived at first light, leading 2 horses, his own large bay gelding and the gentle mare Daisy. Olivia met him downstairs, dressed in her new traveling clothes with her few possessions packed into saddlebags. Mrs. Patterson fussed over her like a mother hen, pressing a package of food into her hands and making her promise to write as soon as she could. "You're sure about this, dear?" The landlady asked for the 10th time. "I'm sure." And she was. As Peter helped her mount Daisy, his hand steadying her even though the mare stood perfectly still, Olivia felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was what she was supposed to do, where she was supposed to be going. They rode out of Prescott as the town was waking up, the sun painting the mountains in shades of gold and orange. The trail led north and west, climbing gradually into the high country. Peter set an easy pace, mindful of Olivia's limited riding experience, and they stopped frequently to rest the horses and stretch their legs. As the day wore on and the town fell away behind them, Olivia felt something shift inside her. The constant low-level anxiety she'd carried for 3 years, the awareness of being a woman alone in a rough town, began to fade. Out here, with Peter beside her and the vastness of the landscape stretching in all directions, she felt free in a way she never had before. They talked as they rode, though sometimes they lapsed into companionable silence. Peter pointed out landmarks, shared stories about the territory, taught her the names of the plants and trees they passed. Olivia watched the way he moved with his horse, the easy confidence of someone completely at home in this environment, and felt her respect for him grow even deeper. As evening approached, Peter led them off the main trail to a small clearing beside a stream. "We'll camp here tonight," he said, swinging down from his horse with practiced ease. "It's sheltered, and there's water for the horses." Olivia dismounted with less grace, her legs stiff from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle. Peter was beside her in an instant, his hand on her elbow to steady her. "You all right? Just sore? I'm not used to riding all day. It gets easier." Peter's hand lingered on her arm for a moment longer than necessary before he reluctantly pulled away. Come on, I'll teach you how to make a proper mountain camp. Over the next hour, Peter showed Olivia how to tend the horses, how to build a fire that would burn steady through the night, how to set up a simple camp that was comfortable without being elaborate. He worked with the efficiency of long practice, and Olivia found herself fascinated by his competence, the way he moved through each task with purpose and skill. They ate a simple dinner of beans and bacon, sitting by the fire as the stars emerged overhead in brilliant profusion. Olivia had never seen so many stars, had never realized the sky could hold such infinite depths. In town, with the lights from buildings and the smoke from chimneys, the night sky was muted. But out here, it was glorious. "It's beautiful," she breathed, her neck tilted back to take it all in. "Wait until you see it from the cabin," Peter said softly. "Up there, with no trees to block the view, it feels like you could reach up and touch them." As the fire burned down to embers and the temperature dropped, Peter retrieved blankets from his pack and showed Olivia how to arrange them for maximum warmth. He'd brought an extra one for her, and he insisted she take his bedroll as well, claiming he was used to sleeping on the ground. Olivia lay wrapped in the blankets, staring up at the stars, intensely aware of Peter's presence a few feet away. The sounds of the night surrounded them, crickets and the soft rush of the stream and the occasional call of an owl. It should have been frightening being out in the wilderness like this, but instead Olivia felt peaceful. "Peter," she said softly into the darkness. "Yeah, thank you. For today, for all of this. I know you didn't plan on having company when you came to town." There was a pause, then Peter's voice came through the darkness, warm and honest. "Best thing that could have happened to me, you coming along. Sleep well, Olivia." "You too." But Olivia lay awake for a long time, listening to Peter's breathing even out as he fell asleep, thinking about what the next days would bring and trying to quiet the nervous excitement fluttering in her chest. The second day of travel was harder than the first. The trail grew steeper and rougher, winding up into the high mountains where pine trees grew thick and the air grew thin. Olivia's muscles, already sore from the previous day, protested every movement. But she gritted her teeth and kept going, determined not to slow them down or make Peter regret bringing her. Around midday, as they paused to rest the horses beside a cascading waterfall, Peter studied her with concern. "You're hurting." "I'm fine, Olivia," she sighed. "I'm sore, yes. But I can keep going. How much farther?" "Another few hours. We'll be there before dark." He hesitated, then added, "I'm proud of you. A lot of people couldn't handle this ride, but you haven't complained once." The praise warmed her more than the afternoon sun. "I told you I wasn't delicate." "No, you're not. You're tough as boot leather." Peter's smile took any sting out of the comparison. "Come on, let's keep moving. The sooner we get there, the sooner you can rest properly." The last few hours of the journey tested Olivia's determination to its limits. The trail became so steep in places that they had to dismount and lead the horses. Her legs trembled with fatigue, and several times she stumbled on the rocky ground. Each time, Peter was there, catching her arm, steadying her with his solid presence. He never suggested turning back, never questioned her ability to continue, and that faith kept her moving forward when her body begged to stop. Finally, as the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, they emerged from the forest into a high mountain meadow. And there, nestled against the rock face with a view that stretched for miles, stood a cabin. It was small, one room with a covered porch, built from logs that had weathered to a soft gray. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, which confused Olivia until she realized Peter must have banked the fire before he left for town. A small corral stood to one side, and a shed that probably served as a stable. The setting was breathtaking. surrounded by peaks that still held snow in their highest reaches, with the meadow spreading out below in a carpet of grass going golden with autumn. "It's not much," Peter said, and Olivia could hear the uncertainty in his voice, as if he was suddenly seeing his home through her eyes and finding it wanting. "It's perfect," she breathed and meant it. This place, so remote and wild and beautiful, felt like something out of a dream. "Peter, it's absolutely perfect." The relief on his face was unmistakable. He helped her down from Daisy, his hands spanning her waist, and for a moment they stood close together, looking at each other instead of the view. The tension between them had been building over the past 2 days, and now, with no destination ahead and no distractions, it felt almost unbearable. Peter cleared his throat and stepped back. "Let me get the horses settled, then I'll show you inside." Olivia watched him lead the horses to the corral, admiring the way he moved even when he was doing something as simple as caring for the animals. Everything about Peter Walsh spoke of competence and strength, but also gentleness. It was a combination that called to something deep in her soul. Once the horses were tended, Peter led Olivia into the cabin. The interior was simple but well made, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall, a table and 2 chairs near the window, a bed in the corner with a colorful quilt, and shelves holding supplies and a few books. It was clean and organized, the home of someone who took pride in what he had, even if it wasn't much. "I'll sleep in the stable," Peter said, setting her saddlebags on the table. "You take the cabin." "Peter, no, this is your home. I can't take your bed. You're a guest. The bed is yours." "Then we'll trade off. Tonight you sleep in the cabin, tomorrow I will, and so on." Peter looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Olivia's expression must have convinced him it was pointless. "All right, we'll trade off." Over the next few days, Olivia settled into the rhythm of mountain life. She learned to cook over the fireplace, producing meals that were simple but satisfying. She helped Peter with the endless tasks that came with maintaining a homestead, hauling water from the nearby stream, tending the small garden that grew near the cabin, mending clothes and equipment that had seen hard use. The work was physical and demanding, so different from the delicate stitching she'd done in town, but Olivia found she enjoyed it. There was something satisfying about ending each day exhausted but accomplished, having contributed in tangible ways to their survival. And through it all, her feelings for Peter deepened and grew. She learned his habits, his preferences, his quirks. She learned that he was quieter in the mornings, needing time to fully wake up before conversation. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he was comfortable, making observations about the world that were so unexpectedly funny she'd find herself laughing until her sides hurt. She learned that he read at night, working his way slowly through a small collection of books he'd accumulated over the years, moving his lips slightly as he sounded out the harder words. His education had been limited, but his intelligence was keen, and he had a hunger for knowledge that touched her heart. And she learned, though Peter tried to hide it, that he was falling for her just as hard as she'd fallen for him. She caught him watching her with an expression of such longing it made her breath catch. She noticed how he'd find excuses to be near her, to touch her hand or shoulder in passing. She felt the tension between them growing with each day, a magnetic pull that was becoming harder and harder to resist. 1 week passed, then another. The time Olivia had promised herself for this visit came and went, and she said nothing about returning to Prescott. Neither did Peter. They existed in a bubble outside of time, just the two of them and the mountains and the changing leaves that painted the forest in shades of fire. It was near the end of the 2nd week when everything changed. Olivia was doing laundry at the stream, scrubbing Peter's shirts on the rocks while he was off checking his trap lines. The work was meditative, and she was lost in thought, thinking about how happy she'd been these past days, when a sound made her look up. A man stood at the edge of the clearing watching her, and not just any man. Silas Crane, the scarred stranger from Prescott, looking at her with those cold, calculating eyes. Olivia's heart leaped into her throat. She dropped the shirt she'd been washing and stood, looking around desperately for anything she could use as a weapon. The cabin was 50 yards away, Peter's rifle hanging over the fireplace. She'd never make it. "Miss Reynolds," Crane said, his voice smooth and cultured despite his rough appearance. "What a pleasure to see you again. What do you want? How did you find me?" "I'm a bounty hunter, Miss Reynolds. Finding people is what I do." He moved closer and Olivia backed up until her heels were at the water's edge. "As for what I want, well, that's simple. I'm looking for someone and I believe you can help me." "I don't know anything. I don't know you and I don't know whoever you're looking for." "Oh, but you do." Crane pulled a folded paper from his coat and held it out. When Olivia didn't take it, he opened it himself, revealing a wanted poster. The face on the poster was younger, the hair shorter, but the features were unmistakable. "Peter." "That's a lie," Olivia said, but her voice shook. "Peter hasn't done anything wrong. Peter Walsh is wanted in Missouri for murder. He killed a man in a dispute over a mining claim. The bounty is $500, dead or alive." Crane's smile was cold. "I tracked him to Prescott, but by the time I found his trail, he'd left town. With you. So I followed and here we are." "No, you're wrong. Peter would never." "Wouldn't he? How well do you really know this man, Miss Reynolds? You've been alone with him for weeks. Has he told you about his past, about the man he beat to death with his bare hands?" Olivia's mind was reeling, but beneath the shock was certainty. She knew Peter, knew his gentleness, his kindness, his protective nature. Whatever had happened in Missouri, there had to be an explanation. "I don't believe you." "It doesn't matter what you believe. The law in Missouri wants him, and I intend to collect that bounty." Crane's hand moved to his gun. "Now you're going to tell me where he is, or things are going to get unpleasant." "Is that so?" Peter's voice came from behind Crane, hard and cold as mountain stone. The bounty hunter spun, his hand going for his gun, but Peter was faster. He'd emerged from the forest like a ghost, moving with a predator's silence, and now his own pistol was trained on Crane's chest. "Drop it," Peter ordered. Crane hesitated, calculating odds, then slowly pulled his gun from its holster with 2 fingers and let it fall to the ground. "Olivia, go to the cabin." "Peter," he said. "I know what he said. We'll talk about it, but right now I need you to go inside." Olivia wanted to argue, wanted to stay and hear whatever explanation Peter could offer, but something in his voice told her this wasn't the time. She walked quickly to the cabin, her mind churning with confusion and fear. Once inside, she grabbed Peter's rifle from above the fireplace, loading it with shaking hands. If Crane tried anything, if Peter needed help, she'd be ready. Through the window, she watched the 2 men face each other across the clearing. They were too far away for her to hear what they were saying, but their body language told the story. Crane was arguing, gesturing, probably offering deals or making threats. Peter stood like a mountain, unmoved and unmovable, his gun never wavering. Finally, Peter gestured with his pistol, indicating Crane should walk toward the trail. The bounty hunter hesitated, then complied, moving slowly with his hands raised. Peter followed at a safe distance. They disappeared into the trees, and Olivia was left alone with her thoughts and the rifle clutched in her white-knuckled hands. An hour passed, then another. The sun began its descent toward evening, and still Peter didn't return. Olivia's mind conjured terrible scenarios. Crane had overpowered him. There had been a fight. Peter was lying injured in the forest, needing help she couldn't provide. She was on the verge of going out to search for him when she heard footsteps on the porch. Peter filled the doorway, whole and unharmed, but the expression on his face made Olivia's heart ache. He looked exhausted, defeated, older than his years. "Is he gone?" she asked. "For now. I took his gun, his horse, and his supplies, told him if he came back here I'd kill him." Peter moved to the table and sat heavily, his shoulders slumped. "But he'll be back, with the law or more bounty hunters or both. He's not the type to give up on $500. Olivia set the rifle aside and moved to sit across from him. "Tell me what happened in Missouri. The truth." Peter was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on his hands where they rested on the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. "I was 19, had a small claim, nothing special, but it was mine. There was a man named Jack Sullivan, owned the claim next to mine. He was always trouble, always pushing boundaries, trying to intimidate the smaller operators into selling out cheap. One day I came back from town and found him on my claim, pulling gold out of my sluice box. We argued. He pulled a gun. We fought for it." Peter paused, his jaw tight. "The gun went off. Sullivan fell, hit his head on a rock. I tried to help him, tried to get him to wake up, but he was gone. I panicked. Ran. Figured no one would believe it was self-defense, that they'd hang me for sure, so I ran west, kept running until I ended up here. But it was self-defense." "You didn't murder him. Try telling that to a judge in Missouri. I was a 19-year-old drifter with no family, no connections. Sullivan had friends, had money. I'd have been convicted for sure." Peter finally looked up at her, and the pain in his eyes was raw. "I never meant to lie to you, Olivia. But how do you tell someone you're falling in love with that you're a wanted man? That being with you means looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life." Olivia reached across the table and took his hands in hers. They were rough and calloused, the hands of a man who'd worked hard for everything he had, and she held them tight. "You're telling me now. That's what matters. You should go back to Prescott. Get away from me before this gets worse. If Crane comes back with a marshal, if there's shooting, I can't have you caught in the middle of it." "No," Peter blinked. "Olivia." "No," she repeated, firmer this time. "I'm not leaving you to face this alone. We'll figure something out. We'll go to Sheriff Daniels, explain what really happened. Maybe he can contact the authorities in Missouri, get the charges dropped or reduced. It's been 8 years. No one is going to believe my story now. Then we'll find another way. We'll hire a lawyer, we'll find witnesses, something. But I'm not abandoning you, Peter Walsh. I love you." The words hung in the air between them, huge and irrevocable. Peter's eyes widened, and for a moment he looked almost frightened, as if the thing he'd wanted most had become terrifyingly real now that it was offered. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying. I love you. I've loved you since you stepped between me and danger in Prescott, maybe even before that. These past weeks have been the happiest of my life, and I'm not giving that up without a fight." Peter stood abruptly, pulling his hands from hers, and paced to the window. His back was to her, his shoulders tense. "If you stay with me, your life will always be uncertain. We'll always be waiting for the next bounty hunter, the next lawman. I can't ask you to live like that." "You're not asking. I'm choosing." Olivia stood and moved to stand behind him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. "I've had enough of safety and comfort and loneliness, Peter. I'd rather have uncertainty with you than security without you." He turned then, and the look on his face stole her breath. Hope and love and fear all mixed together, the armor he usually wore stripped completely away. "Olivia, She didn't let him finish. Rising on her toes, she pressed her lips to his, tentative and tender. For a heartbeat, Peter froze, and Olivia thought she'd made a terrible mistake. Then his arms came around her, pulling her close, and he was kissing her back with a passion that made her dizzy. They broke apart, both breathing hard. Peter rested his forehead against hers, his arms still wrapped around her waist. "I love you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "God help me, I love you so much it terrifies me. Then let me help you. Let me stand with you whatever comes. All right." Peter pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "All right, we'll figure this out together." That night they talked for hours, making plans and discussing options. Peter was reluctant to involve Sheriff Daniels, fearing that even a sympathetic lawman would be obligated to arrest him once he knew the truth. But Olivia pointed out that Crane already knew where they were, and it was only a matter of time before he returned with reinforcements. Better to face the situation head-on, with friends beside them, than to wait for trouble to come. In the end, they decided to return to Prescott together. They would talk to Sheriff Daniels, explain the situation, and hope that the lawman's fairness and his friendship with Olivia would be enough to give them a chance. It was risky, but doing nothing was riskier still. They left at first light, riding hard down the mountain. The journey that had taken 2 days on the way up, they made in a day and a half on the way down, camping only when the darkness made travel too dangerous. By the afternoon of the second day, they were riding into Prescott, drawing curious stares from everyone they passed. Sheriff Daniels was in his office when they arrived, and his expression was grave as he listened to their story. Peter told him everything, holding nothing back, while Olivia sat beside him and held his hand. When Peter finished, the lawman was quiet for a long time, staring at the wanted poster that Crane had left with him days before. "This is a hell of a situation," Daniels finally said. "If I don't arrest you, I'm breaking the law myself. But if I do arrest you and send you back to Missouri, you might hang for a killing that sounds an awful lot like self-defense." "I know I'm putting you in a difficult position, Sheriff," Peter said, "but I'm asking you to hear me out before you make a decision. I'm listening. Give me 2 weeks. Let me write to Missouri, to the sheriff who was in charge 8 years ago. Let me see if there are any witnesses who remember that Sullivan was the aggressor, that he'd been causing trouble. Let me try to build a defense. If after 2 weeks you still think I need to be arrested, I'll surrender myself peacefully." Sheriff Daniels stroked his mustache, considering. 2 weeks is a long time. How do I know you won't run? You have my word, and you have Olivia. I'm not going anywhere without her, and she's not leaving Prescott. The sheriff looked at Olivia, who nodded confirmation. "It's true, Sheriff. Peter's not running anymore. We just want a chance to prove his innocence." Another long silence. Then, slowly, Sheriff Daniels nodded. 2 weeks. "But you check in with me every day, Walsh. And if I get even a hint that you're planning to bolt, I'll hunt you down myself." "Understood, understood. Thank you, Sheriff." As they left the office, Olivia felt weak with relief. 2 weeks wasn't much, but it was something. It was a chance. Over the next days, Peter wrote letters to Missouri, to sheriffs and lawyers and anyone who might remember the incident from 8 years ago. Olivia helped him compose the letters, her education and way with words lending polish to his blunt statements of fact. They sent the letters by fast courier, paying extra for quick delivery, and then settled in to wait. The waiting was hard. Every day that passed without a response felt like a year. Peter stayed at the boarding house, in the room next to Olivia's, and they spent their time preparing for whatever came next. Peter found work helping at the lumber mill, honest labor that paid enough to cover his expenses. Olivia returned to her sewing, though her heart wasn't in it anymore. How could she focus on dress commissions when their entire future hung in the balance? Silas Crane was gone from Prescott, run out of town by Sheriff Daniels, but they knew he was still out there somewhere, waiting. And there would be others like him, more bounty hunters drawn by the promise of easy money. They had to clear Peter's name, had to find a way to resolve this, or they'd spend the rest of their lives running. 10 days into their 2 weeks, a letter arrived. Peter's hands shook as he opened it, with Olivia reading over his shoulder. It was from a deputy sheriff in Missouri, a man named Tom Garrett who'd been present at the Sullivan incident. The letter was short but powerful. Deputy Garrett remembered Peter, remembered Sullivan's reputation as a bully and a cheat. He'd always suspected there was more to the story than the official report suggested, but by the time he'd looked into it, Peter was long gone. The letter stated that if Peter was willing to return to Missouri and testify, Deputy Garrett would personally advocate for the charges to be reduced or dropped entirely, given the circumstances and the time that had passed. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was hope. Real, tangible hope. Peter and Olivia took the letter to Sheriff Daniels, who read it carefully and then nodded slowly. "This changes things. With a lawman willing to speak on your behalf, you've got a real chance, but you'll have to go back face a judge. Are you willing to do that?" Peter looked at Olivia, and she saw her own determination reflected in his eyes. "Yes, I'm done running. Whatever happens, at least I'll know I tried to make things right." 2 days later, Peter and Sheriff Daniels left on the train for Missouri, with Olivia promising to follow once Peter sent word that it was safe. The parting was wrenching, made bearable only by Peter's promise that he'd return for her, no matter what. "I love you," he said as they stood on the train platform, his hands cupping her face. "You saved me, Olivia, not just from Crane, but from a life of running and hiding. You made me want to fight for a future instead of just surviving. I'll come back for you, I swear it. I know you will." Olivia kissed him, not caring who saw, pouring all her love and faith into that kiss. "Be safe. Come home to me." Then the train was pulling away, and Olivia was left standing on the platform, watching the man she loved disappear into the distance. The next 3 weeks were the longest of Olivia's life. She threw herself into her work, taking on more commissions than she could reasonably handle, anything to keep her mind occupied. Sarah checked on her daily, offering comfort and company, and Mrs. Patterson fussed over her like a mother hen. But nothing could truly ease the gnawing anxiety that lived in Olivia's chest. Finally, 23 days after Peter had left, a telegram arrived. Olivia's hands shook so badly she could barely open it. The message was brief but beautiful. "Charges dropped. Coming home. Marry me." Olivia burst into tears right there in the telegraph office, not caring that Mr. Sanders, the operator, was staring at her with concern. Peter was coming home. He was free, and he wanted to marry her. "Yes," she said to the telegram, to the empty air, to Peter wherever he was. "Yes, yes, yes." Peter returned to Prescott 3 days later, looking thinner and more tired than when he'd left, but with a lightness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Olivia met him at the train station, and the moment he stepped onto the platform, she was in his arms. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around while she laughed and cried at the same time. "You're here. You're really here. I'm here. I'm free. And I'm never leaving you again." Peter set her down but kept his arms around her. "Did you get my telegram? Did you?" "I know it was presumptuous, asking like that, but Yes," Olivia interrupted. "My answer is yes. I'll marry you, Peter Walsh." The kiss they shared drew cheers from the other people on the platform, but neither of them cared. They were together, they were free, and they had a future stretching ahead of them full of possibility. They were married a week later in a small ceremony at the church in Prescott, with Sheriff Daniels standing up as Peter's witness and Sarah as Olivia's. It was simple and beautiful, and when Peter slid the ring onto her finger, a simple gold band he'd bought with money from his honest work at the mill, Olivia felt like the wealthiest woman in the world. After the wedding, They spent a week in Prescott, giving Olivia time to finish her last few commissions and say proper goodbyes to the friends she'd made. Then they packed up her belongings and headed back to the mountain cabin, riding the same trail they'd traveled weeks before. But everything was different now. Before, Olivia had been a visitor, unsure of her place or her future. Now she was Peter's wife, returning to the home they would share. The cabin looked even more beautiful than she remembered, the autumn colors at their peak, the mountains standing eternal and majestic against the brilliant blue sky. They settled into married life with surprising ease. The work was still hard, the conditions still rough by town standards, but Olivia found she loved it. She loved the simplicity of days governed by sunlight and seasons rather than clocks. She loved the quiet, broken only by the wind in the pines and the call of birds. She loved the way Peter would come in from working his claim or checking his traps and pull her into his arms, kissing her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Winter came, and it was as harsh as Peter had warned. Snow piled high around the cabin, and some days the cold was so intense they barely left the warmth of the fireplace. But even that had its own beauty. They spent the long evenings reading to each other, or talking, or simply sitting in comfortable silence while Peter carved and Olivia sewed. They learned each other's bodies and souls, the intimacy of marriage deepening the connection they'd felt from the start. Spring brought a thaw and a surprise. Olivia realized she was pregnant, a discovery that filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure. Having a baby in the mountains, far from a doctor, was risky. But Peter proved himself more than capable, reading everything he could find about childbirth, preparing supplies, making the cabin as safe and comfortable as possible. Their son was born on a clear June morning, with Peter's steady hands delivering him into the world. They named him Samuel, after Peter's father, and he was perfect. Tiny and red-faced and perfect. As Olivia held her son in her arms, with Peter sitting beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, she thought back to that day in the Prescott market when she'd first felt Silas Crane's eyes on her. How terrified she'd been, how uncertain of everything. She could never have imagined then that the fear of that moment would lead to this, to love and marriage and a family of her own. "What are you thinking about?" Peter asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "About how lucky I am, how a terrible day turned into the best thing that ever happened to me." "I'm the lucky one. You gave me a reason to stop running, to fight for something instead of just surviving." Peter looked down at their son, and the love on his face made Olivia's heart overflow. "You gave me a family, a home, everything I never knew I wanted." They sat together as the afternoon sun streamed through the window, a family complete and whole. Outside, the mountains stood eternal and unchanging, but inside the little cabin, everything had changed. Two people who'd been alone had found each other, and in finding each other, had found themselves. The years that followed were good ones. Peter's claim paid out steadily, nothing spectacular but enough to provide for their growing family. 2 years after Samuel came a daughter, whom they named Grace. And 2 years after that, another son they called Thomas. The cabin expanded to accommodate them all, with Peter adding rooms with the same careful craftsmanship he brought to everything he did. Olivia never regretted her choice to leave Prescott, never longed for the easier life she might have had. Every morning she woke up beside the man she loved, surrounded by their children, and felt grateful beyond measure. They made trips to town periodically, to sell furs and ore, to purchase supplies, to let the children see other people and remind themselves that civilization existed. But they always returned to the mountains with relief, to the home they'd built together. Sheriff Daniels became a regular correspondent, sending letters with news from Prescott and the wider world. Silas Crane had eventually been arrested for assault in Colorado and was serving time in prison, no longer a threat to anyone. The deputy who'd helped Peter, Tom Garrett, had become sheriff himself and occasionally sent friendly letters, pleased that his testimony had helped an innocent man go free. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Peter and Olivia made the trip to Prescott without the children, leaving them with a trusted neighbor for a few days. They stayed at the boarding house, in Olivia's old room, and spent their days walking the streets where they'd first met. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stepped in that day," Olivia mused as they stood in the market square, near the spot where it had all begun. "If Crane had caught up to me, or if I'd made it home but never saw you again." Peter pulled her close, his arms around her waist. "I don't wonder. I know exactly what would have happened. I'd have spent the rest of my life regretting not talking to you, not asking your name, not taking the chance. You were meant to be mine, Olivia. I knew it the moment I saw you. That's very romantic for a mountain man." "I learned from the best." Peter kissed her soft and sweet, the kiss of a man who knew he had a lifetime to love his wife. "Come on, let's get back to the hotel. We have a few hours before dinner and I have plans for you, Mrs. Walsh." Olivia laughed, feeling like a young bride again despite the years and the children and the hard work that had weathered them both. "Lead the way, Mr. Walsh." They walked hand in hand through the streets of Prescott, two people who'd found love in the most unlikely of circumstances and built a life that was richer than either could have imagined. Behind them, the mountains rose toward the sky, constant and enduring. And ahead of them, whatever the future held, they would face it together. Because sometimes when strangers become protectors and protectors become lovers, the story that emerges is the kind that lasts forever. The kind written in trust and choice, and the daily decision to stand beside each other, no matter what challenges come. The kind of love that doesn't just survive in the Wild West, but thrives there, growing stronger with each passing year. And as the sun set over Prescott that evening, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Peter and Olivia Walsh walked back to their temporary lodgings with smiles on their faces and love in their hearts, ready to return to the mountains and the life they'd built there. Ready for whatever came next, because they would face it together, always together.